He has been called one of America's best leaders, one of the 100 most influential people in the world, one of America's 10 best college presidents. At ACII, we just call him our future.
That's sweet. That's really nice.
And I have the great privilege to call you my friend.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. That's wonderful.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Freeman Hrabowski.
Thank you very much, Ted. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Well, when people were talking about who might follow the wonderful Molly Broad, who is here somewhere, all of us wanted to find someone who represented our values at a time of great challenge. And I was so delighted when we chose Ted. Would you give Ted a round of applause? Paul, I was so inspired by what you said and the commonality of the human spirit that I couldn't help but go back to the story I always tell, because my mother was a child maid. I tell that story over and over again, and because the woman in the house, a wealthy white woman, allowed her to work in the library, she got a chance to begin to read in a way she had not before, because there was no library for children of color in the late 20s and 30s in her hometown, Wetumpka, Alabama. And as a result of that, quite frankly, she learned how to read and to love to read. And amazingly, she wanted to become an English teacher because she could see the difference that reading did in her writing, her thinking, her understanding, context. And so Mama did just that. And she became this wonderful teacher. And she would quote Zora Neale Hurston. In the book, Their Eyes Were Watching God. And I always get goosebumps remembering my mama washing dishes and quoting to us. And I'm wanting to say, Mama, stop quoting her. And now I love just thinking about the notion of your mother quoting Zora Neale Hurston. Ships at a distance have every man's wish on board. For some, they come in with the tide. For others, they sail forever on the horizon, never out of sight, never landing, until the watcher turns his head away in resignation, his dreams mocked to death by time. That is the life of men, and Mother would say, and women. Give Zora Neale Hurston a round of applause. Zora Neale Hurston. I am so honored. I begin by accepting this award with great humility on behalf of my wonderful colleagues and students. And so I want all of my colleagues from UMBC who are here and my ACE fellows to stand just for a minute. Would you give them a round of applause? All of the UMBC folks, now give them a round of applause. Jackie, you ACE fellow, get up. Talithia, yeah. I'm just so proud of all of them. It's wonderful. It's wonderful. When I was a college freshman, I'll never forget thinking I was the smartest kid in the world, and we had the first calculus test, and the professor was calling the grades and the 100, and I had the lowest of the A's, and I had tears coming. I learned then I was far from being the smartest in the world. But there was one person who had gotten 100, and we all looking around for this boy, and all of a sudden the professor says, Coleman, come get your paper, and this wonderful, pretty girl gets up, and I go, a girl? This is the 60s, folks. And I'm so angry, and I'm looking at her because she's so poised and no big deal, 100 on the calculator. And I said, I'm going to marry her one day, and I did. Jackie, would you please stand? Jackie, would you? I tell my students that story, men and women, and I say, if you can't beat them, marry them. It makes a difference. It really does. The 100th anniversary of ACE, of ACE. Some of you may know that the institution, this organization, was founded to pool together resources in order to focus on the training necessary to defend our country in World War I. Pooling these resources that we have been, as an organization, and we all claim it, We have been, as a collective higher education organization, at the forefront of social change for a long time. In fact, during the Great Depression, we had a commission on unemployed youth, and later on we developed the GED, and then advocating for the GI Bill, even when some presidents didn't believe veterans should go to college. But ACII did push for that, and then for the post-9/11 GI Bill. But the one amazing action that most of us could not believe might have happened was that even in 1938, this organization studied the effects of racism on African-American children. In 1938, give ACII a round of applause for that, for doing that. It's a big deal. And so when I think about ACII, I think about the Office of Women, the Office of Minorities, and the idea has been this, that if we are to be the higher education institutions that we need to be for the future, we must become much broader in our participation, and we must be willing to answer the difficult questions, the sticky questions that we have in our society. Each of us has a story, and you heard Ted saying some of mine, and our stories from childhood make us who we are. And so I am a child of the 60s, a child of the civil rights movement, and I'll never forget being in that jail and looking out the window with all of my little kids, younger than I was 12, and they were as young as 8. We were there because we wanted a better education. And we're looking out at our parents and Dr. King, and he said, what you do this day will have an impact on children who've not yet been born. And somehow we appreciated that there was some profundity there, though we didn't fully understand it. And shortly after that, you had the March on Washington. You know, and that period was such a powerful one. And I keep thinking back to what happened during that period. Well, that was in May of 1963. 1 month before that, my campus, our campus, UMBC, had been chartered. The charter was given by the Maryland legislature, and we became the first university in our state to admit students of all races. Every other campus had people from one race or the other. And at that time, everything was black and white. Let me prove it. How many of you remember black and white television? Oh, you look really good. You really do. Because my students always go, what do you mean black and white television? It was always in color. It really was not. But at that time, we were doing everything in black and white. And so think about the notion that all of a sudden you're going to bring in these people, and this is that period. So that was in April, and in May it was the time of our march. And then this is what's significant. In June, a picture, a photo, a memory that I can never erase. The governor of my state stood in the schoolhouse door and said to this country, no way will I let those little black children in. And he said it much more, in a much worse way, because they used that word Negro. And it was just awful. And I'll never forget looking at, we were so excited about these kids going to the University of Alabama, black kids, and all of a sudden, and he told us that we were not good enough. And I'll never forget, as the tears were coming down my face, my mother came in and saw us, and she said, let me tell you something, son. She said, you are not second rate, but you must never define yourself as a victim. Give my mother a round of applause for that idea. You must never define yourself as a victim. And that led to my understanding, get the knowledge and it would be okay. Well, shortly after that, we did have the Civil Rights Act, and we had the Higher Education Act, 64, 65, and the Voting Rights Act, and amazingly, we changed America. So when people ask me the question, does college matter? Does higher education matter? I look at them and say, just look around, because the fact is this. When I heard Paul saying what he said, there's no way he could be up here as one of the most prestigious presidents in the country if he hadn't gotten the education. It makes where would any of us in this room be without that education? Because you see, in the 60s, only 10% of Americans had actually graduated from a four-year institution. And amazingly, it was about 11% of whites and between 3 and 4% of blacks. So most Americans in the 60s of all races never expected their children to graduate from college. And all of a sudden, with that Higher Education Act, and then with the Pell Grant, people who were not from money, from wealth, could imagine the possibilities. And now we have over 30%. Well over 30% with college degrees, varying by area. There's no doubt when you think about the notion that you've got 37, 38% of whites, We have about 22% of blacks, still only 15% of that group that is the fastest growing Hispanics, and a lower percentage of those who are Native Americans. And with the Asian population being slightly above 50%, because many people come from other countries here for an education, for grad school, and their kids go there. But there are groups of Asian students who are not in that, so we can't just generalize. What am I saying? 2/3 of Americans today still have not graduated from a four-year institution, and when you take into account that half of Americans begin in community colleges, the fact is that you still only have 10, 12% with that AA degree. And this is what I would say to you. How many of you in this room are either the first in your family or first generation to go to college? I want you to stand. Let me see what you look like. Stand or if you're first of either type, either first or first generation, give all of them a round of applause. It's a powerful statement. It is a powerful statement. And the notion that I want you to really remember is this, that we must tell our stories. People need to know, Paul, you know this, when you tell people, stand if you're first generation college, that you are from that background. It is so important that people understand that they can do it also. And yet, when we think about the group in the bottom economic group, even with all the matters about racial groups and ethnicities, the fact is that that bottom quarter economically, a much lower percentage of those, some would say under 10%, some would get it up to 15+%, but we know this. If a child comes from a poor family in our great democracy, that child still has much too low a chance of graduating from a 2-year or a 4-year campus. And so the question becomes, what will the future of higher education be as we look at it? And I would say this, it will be about wonderful liberal arts education, of course, for many. It will be about a great community college, AA, some going on for others. It will be about certificates and competencies. And the notion I use is one the campus hears me use all the time. I did not make it up, but it's the notion of the genius of the and versus the tyranny of the or. Comes from Collins, all right? And the idea is not one or the other. It's not getting a job or having a broad education. It is how we combine these areas and give people opportunities and pathways, and how we open our minds to different ways of educating people. The ACII from the beginning was here for that notion of social change. You know, I've had the privilege recently of serving on 2 commissions that I recommend to you, the reports. One was on the future of the presidency from Aspen, and the other was on by the American Academy of Arts and Sciences on the future of undergraduate education. If you've not read those reports, please do so, because they talk in great detail about what matters. When you think about the presidency, the fact is that people need education. The ACII Fellows Program is a wonderful way of beginning to look at how we move up the ladder in leadership positions. But at the same time, it talks about the role of boards and the fact that boards must play an increasingly important role in supporting a president, in supporting the faculty there, in the importance of shared governance, of giving people opportunities. And it says in that presidency report that somehow we must think about how that president will be a thought leader, what role that person will play in thinking through what the future of our country holds. Presidents are held in high regard. People expect us to do the right thing. And somehow read that report and think about the ways in which we can bring more people, because it says this, more women, more people of color, from all backgrounds into those kinds of positions. It also makes the point, though, that higher education, as forward-thinking as it is, still has almost 80% of the professoriate who's white. And the fact is that our students, the changing demographics, we must bring more people into the professoriate who are from all racial, ethnic backgrounds and women. Give me a round of applause for that idea. It's very important. And the undergrad report talks about teaching and learning and the fact that we should be constantly looking at other ways of helping students. The fact is that so many of our students, almost half of those who start, don't graduate. We must find ways of understanding those challenges. It's not just about money. We must look at the ways. My campus is really working on innovation in terms of a redesign of many of the courses. The Chemistry Discovery Center, as an example, of bringing civic engagement into the work to show them the relationship, even between engineering and what we do in inner city Baltimore for access for students, or in coming up with structures for clean water in rural Kenya. The idea of showing people how what they do can make a big difference in the world. You know, it is so significant. I'm so proud of Kara Freeman, who is here as one of your vice presidents, who is in information systems, because she gets the point about connecting across disciplines and the point, quite frankly, about civic engagement, even as she works with the alumni board. What is my point? That we must prepare our students to be citizens. You know, it was my friend Fred Lawrence from the Secretary of Phi Beta Kappa, who quotes Judge Brandeis, the former Supreme Court Justice, who said this: the most important role that we have in our society is that of citizen. And Lawrence goes on to say there are three very important strategies and themes we must focus on. One, teaching students how to turn information into knowledge. Two, evaluating arguments. And three, engaging in reasoned debate by being able to present rational claims and then listening thoughtfully and even believing we can find the common ground. You know, as we think about the leaders in our country, I want us to think about the fact that, yes, the liberal arts are so important, the liberal education, and yet many of our leaders have had the finest of education we can provide. Expensive education. And yet the question is, what happened? What happened? They're ours. These are our graduates, folks. So we can claim them and this is the point about being honest. My colleagues and I are working on a book, and we're thinking about a title of Being Honest in Higher Education. Being honest, seeking the truth, as Ruth talked about this morning. The idea is we've done some wonderful things and we produce many wonderful people, but we all talk about the top people. We all talk about the great successes. And the question is, in our society right now, we know we can be better than this. We must think about what else we might do to help our students who will be those citizens and those leaders to find the common ground, to not simply teach people how to win, but how to find the common ground. My college classmates will laugh when I say this next statement, because my son calls my wife and me mega nerds, all right? We're not exactly athletic, quite frankly. Of course, I tell my grown son, mega nerds can pay all their bills all the time, if you get my... But let me say, and I never thought I would stand up and say this, but I have to say it. I am so proud of the UMBC basketball. We are going to the dance. Give us a round. I am so proud of them. I really am. I mean, I literally, my fellows, they say, you're crying. Yeah, I'm crying. It's a big deal. It's what for those young people, for the campus, but also what really made me have goosebumps was that those top two players in that last minute, both who did so well, and you see the video with the three-pointer, those two students earned 4.0 last semester. Give them a big round of applause. Now, that's the point I want to make. That it's not just about the athletics, it's about the balance between academics and athletics can make all the difference in the world. And so it's our culture we must think about, the culture of our society, the culture of our institutions, because they are inextricably linked. And the culture has everything to do with the way we ask questions, the questions that we ask, the achievements that we really believe in, the celebrations that we have, the initiatives that we support. You know, if you've not read Eric Weiner's book, Geography of Bliss, it says this: our culture has everything to do with where we are, because where we are, of course, is vital to who we are. But by where, I'm speaking not only of the physical environment, but also of our cultural environment. And this is the quote that I want you to think about. He says, culture is the sea we swim in, so pervasive, so all-consuming, that we fail to notice its existence until we step out of it. And there's my challenge to us in higher education. We must step out of it and try to understand how people who are not feeling that they are a part of our society, how we must reach out to them to let them know we care. Whether they're in inner city Baltimore or some Midwestern town where nobody's going to college, whatever it is, or a rural area, we must reach out of our culture and ask the question, in what ways might we seem arrogant to other people or condescending? And how can we listen to the challenges that other people face? You know, civic engagement is the name of the game. We were delighted to host the Imagining America, looking at how the arts and the humanities can be infused into all of what we do when we think about what we do in communities. We supervise 500 little children who are first-time offenders, and we've been doing it as long as the Meyerhoff program. By the way, the Meyerhoff and UMBC now, we become the leading producer of African Americans who complete MD PhDs by a factor of 2 to 1. Give us a big round of applause for that. A factor of 2 to 1. And it has everything. You know, I talk about this, Talitha, in my TED Talk. You look at my TED Talk, trying to get the numbers up. We always laugh about that. The fact is that what I say about science is true about the humanities. Listen to the things we talk about in terms of pillars of college success. It has everything to do with high expectations. It is about building community. It's about engaging the faculty. It is about those rich, nurturing relationships. It takes somebody in the humanities to pull somebody into the humanities. You know, right now we have a wonderful grant from Sloan to produce students of color in economics since the numbers are so few. But it takes economists to pull them into that work. We've got these endowment grants and the Mellon grant, all focused on people of expertise bringing others into the work. And then it takes evaluation. You know, I say so often to my students at the beginning of the year, get beyond your comfort zone. We have desegregated higher education, but we have not really integrated in higher education. You go to our campuses and everybody is by themselves. And there's a time when it's great for kids of any background to spend with each other, or for women to be together, or men. There are times when we want to relate to people who have things in common. But we must set a tone that says, you must get to know people different from yourselves. Give me a round of applause for that idea. Different from yourselves. You know, my campus has students from 100 countries. And students from all over this country, and I'm saying to my colleagues, and my colleagues are saying to students, that if all of these people from around the world stay only with themselves, and if people from urban areas only stay with people from urban areas, and those from suburban with them, when we get out into the real world, we will never mix. It is only through the experiences in our 2- and 4-year institutions that we can encourage, support, and actually give incentives for people to get to know people different from themselves. It is a sticky question, and yet we must ask that question because we ought to be the moral leaders. You know, I'll never forget the 50th anniversary is coming up. So I'll never forget when Dr. King was assassinated. Just as some of you remember when our beloved President Kennedy was assassinated, there was a deep feeling in our stomach. I was in the 10th grade when President Kennedy was killed. And then I was in college, sophomore, when Dr. King died. And in each case, we said what I hear my students saying now. Has it ever been this bad before? What's going to come to our country? Are we going down the tubes? Do we not care about people in other countries? Do we not care about the children in our society, the wonderful dreamers and others? Doc, why is it that your generation seems to be so hypocritical to say we're supposed to respect women, and yet we see leaders of all types not respecting women? We must respect women. Give me a round of applause for the idea. We must respect women, and we need to say it. And that all of these groups, whether it's Black Lives Matter, higher education, all these things matter. And what I remember so well, I'll never forget it, was wondering what's going to come of us with the president who's been killed, with Dr. King. And yet somehow this country moved together. And we were able to understand we are so much better when we get beyond our comfort zones, when we support each other. And who is it that does that more than anybody else? It is the higher education community. You know, when the Alabama race occurred recently, and some don't like to talk about it, I talk about it as often as I can. It is my state. It is my home state. I grew up, I am of the soil of Alabama. And when that senator, when he won, and my students wanted to know, you seem so taken by that. And I'd gotten calls from others from Alabama. I said, you don't understand how hard it was for some people to go against what their families would say they should do. You see, we are all products of that. Even when it's the wrong thing or whatever, we tend to do what's most comfortable. And yet people of every race said we must show the nation that it is not right to disrespect women, and we must go for the person who has the values that will say to the world who we are as a country. And you know, when I looked at that case, I said to myself and to my students, my grandmother's story is important. Grandmama was a 6th grade educated woman who was the wisest person I've ever known. And grandmother actually lived in Wetumpka, Alabama, and she wanted to vote. And she went to vote the first time, and she failed. Why? Because there was something called the Alabama literacy test. If you've not taken that test, go take it. I promise you, you will fail, all right? It's on the Constitution. And her others went, and so she was smart. After the second time, all of them failed. She was so amazing that she got several of them to remember the questions they had. And then she put the questions together. And then my mama, the English teacher, working at the dining room table with my grandmama, the sixth grade, and before you know it, my grandmama is sounding like a lawyer. She knows the Constitution. And when she came back in from taking that test, she looked me in my eyes and she said, I am now a voting citizen in this country. How dare people not vote? How dare they not vote? Don't tell me about complaining. How dare they not vote? And so I tell you, we must have our students involved. We can't tell them how to vote, but to have those critical thinking skills and to think about the dreams we all have and the values that are so important. You know, in that Alabama race, what really touched my heart was when I looked at where people had voted for the people we might have thought were most important for this. They were higher education centers. It was Birmingham. It was Mobile. It was Montgomery. It was Huntsville. It was where the universities were, because it will take us to get people beyond what just family says and to look and say, what's in the best interest of so many more? Higher education, when people ask me the question, does higher education matter? I look them in their eyes and I say, absolutely. I challenge us as a country with the words I use with my students every day. Watch your thoughts, they become your words. Watch your words, they become your actions. Watch your actions, they become your habits. Watch your habits, they become your character. Watch your character, it becomes your destiny, dreams and values. Higher education, we are so special, and we can be even better. God bless you all. Thank you.